The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Windsor Castle, casting long golden rays across the ornate dining room that had witnessed centuries of royal gatherings. King Charles sat quietly at the head of the mahogany table, his weathered hands wrapped around a delicate china teacup, steam rising gently in the crisp autumn air. At 75, the monarch carried the weight of the crown with dignity, though those closest to him could see the subtle signs of the toll it had taken. The castle was unusually quiet for a Saturday morning. Most of the staff moved about their duties with practiced silence, understanding that today was special. It wasn't a state dinner or formal reception, but, rather something far more precious and rare, a private family lunch that had been months in the planning. The Queen Consort, Camilla, had suggested it during one of their evening walks through the gardens, noting how infrequently the immediate family gathered without the pressures of official duties. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, arrived first with their 3 children. George, now 21 and studying at university, carried himself with the composed manner befitting a future king, yet his youthful energy was evident in the way he bounded up the castle steps. Charlotte, 19 and, in her second year at Cambridge, moved with the grace that had become her trademark, her auburn hair catching the morning light as she laughed at something her younger brother had said. Louis, now 16 and, rapidly approaching his father's height, still retained enough boyish enthusiasm to race ahead of his siblings, eager to see his grandfather. The children's excitement was infectious, and even the usually stoic castle guards found themselves smiling as the young royals passed. This wasn't their first visit to Windsor, of course, but there was something different about today's gathering. Perhaps it was the informal nature of the occasion, or maybe it was simply the relief of being together without cameras, protocols, or public appearances to worry about. William arrived shortly after, having driven himself in a simple Range Rover rather than using the official motorcade. At 43, the Prince of Wales had grown into his role with remarkable grace, balancing his duties as heir with his responsibilities as a father and husband. The past few years had been particularly challenging for the royal family, with various personal and public trials testing their resilience. Today, however, was about setting those burdens aside and simply being a family. As he walked through the familiar corridors of Windsor Castle, William reflected on the importance of this gathering. His father had been through so much in recent months, the ongoing health concerns that the palace had been discreet about, the constant pressures of modernizing the monarchy while respecting tradition, and the personal grief that still lingered from losing his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, just 3 years prior. Charles had ascended to the throne at an age when most men were enjoying retirement, inheriting not just a crown but a nation and Commonwealth grappling with their own challenges. The dining room had been prepared with care, though not the formal grandeur typically associated with royal meals. Instead of the full ceremonial china, the table was set with pieces that held sentimental value, plates that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II, glasses that had been wedding gifts, silverware that told the story of generations. Fresh flowers from the castle gardens adorned the table, their autumn colors reflecting the season's beauty that surrounded the ancient walls. Catherine found her father-in-law in the small sitting room adjacent to the dining area, gazing out at the gardens where fallen leaves created a carpet of gold and crimson. She approached quietly, noting the contemplative expression on his face. Charles had always been a thoughtful man, prone to moments of deep reflection, but, lately, these quiet spells seemed more frequent and profound. "The gardens are beautiful this time of year," Catherine said softly, settling into the chair beside him. Her voice carried the warmth that had made her beloved by the public and family alike. Over the years, she had developed a special relationship with Charles, one built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Unlike the sometimes strained relationships depicted in tabloids, theirs was characterized by shared interests in environmental causes, mental health advocacy, and a deep love for the family they both served to protect. Charles turned to her with a smile that reached his eyes, the kind of genuine expression rarely captured by photographers. "Your mother-in-law always said autumn was when Windsor showed its true character," he replied, his voice carrying the familiar warmth that had endeared him to those who knew him personally, despite the sometimes cold public perception. She would have loved today, having everyone together like this. The mention of Queen Elizabeth II brought a moment of comfortable silence between them. The late Queen's presence was still felt throughout the castle, in the way staff continued their duties, in the portraits that lined the walls, and in the traditions that continued to shape royal life. For Charles, stepping into his mother's role while grieving her loss had been one of the most challenging aspects of his reign. She would have been in her element, making sure everyone had enough to eat and that the conversation stayed lively. Catherine agreed, her own fondness for the late Queen evident in her tone. Elizabeth II had been a remarkable grandmother-in-law, offering guidance and support during Catherine's transition into royal life, while always maintaining the perfect balance between family warmth and monarchical dignity. The sound of young voices echoed from the hallway, signaling that the children had finished exploring the castle's familiar corridors and were ready for lunch. Louis's voice could be heard above the others, animatedly describing something he had discovered in one of the portrait galleries, while Charlotte's gentle corrections and George's good-natured teasing created the soundtrack of a normal family dynamic that transcended their extraordinary circumstances. William appeared in the doorway, having shed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves in a gesture that spoke to the informal nature of the gathering. "The children are ready to eat half the kitchen if we don't feed them soon," he announced with the easy humor that had always been his way of lightening serious moments. "I think Louis has grown another inch since breakfast." The comment drew laughter from Charles, who had always delighted in watching his grandchildren grow and develop their own personalities. George's serious nature and sense of responsibility, Charlotte's artistic talents and compassionate spirit, and Louis's irrepressible energy and curiosity each brought something special to family gatherings. Despite the unique pressures they faced as members of the royal family, William and Catherine had worked hard to ensure their children experienced as normal a childhood as possible. As they moved toward the dining room, Camilla joined them, having spent the morning reviewing correspondence and making final preparations for the upcoming week's engagements. The Queen Consort had embraced her role with determination and grace, understanding that her position required her to support not just Charles, but the entire family unit. Her relationship with William and Catherine had evolved into one of mutual respect and genuine friendship, built on shared experiences and common goals. The lunch itself was designed to be comfort food rather than haute cuisine. The kitchen had prepared traditional British fare, roasted beef with Yorkshire pudding, seasonal vegetables from the castle gardens, and desserts that reflected family favorites rather than elaborate confections. This choice reflected Charles's desire for the gathering to feel like a family meal rather than a state occasion. As they settled around the table, the conversation naturally flowed between topics that ranged from the children's studies and interests to current events and family memories. George spoke about his university experiences with the maturity that had impressed his professors and classmates alike. Despite the attention his royal status inevitably attracted, he had managed to build genuine friendships and pursue his academic interests with dedication. Charlotte shared stories about her art history studies and her growing involvement in charitable work, following in the family tradition of using their platform for positive impact. Her passion for environmental conservation, inherited from her grandfather's decades of advocacy, shone through as she described a recent project focusing on sustainable fashion in the textile industry. Louis, despite being the youngest, contributed his own perspectives with the confidence that came from being raised in a family that valued each member's voice. His interests in technology and innovation sparked lengthy discussions with his grandfather, who had always been forward-thinking despite his traditional public image. The meal progressed with the easy rhythm of a family gathering, punctuated by laughter, gentle teasing, and the kind of comfortable silences that spoke to deep familiarity and affection. For Charles, these moments represented some of the greatest joys of his role as both king and grandfather. The weight of the crown seemed lighter when surrounded by the people who knew him not as a monarch, but as a father and grandfather who worried about the same things as any parent, their children's happiness, their grandchildren's futures, and the legacy he would leave behind. As the afternoon light began to shift, casting different shadows across the dining room, the conversation took on a more reflective tone. Without the pressures of official duties or public appearances, the family could address topics that were often difficult to discuss in other settings. The future of the monarchy, the challenges facing the Commonwealth, and the personal costs of public service were all subjects that required careful consideration and family unity. William found himself studying his father's face as Charles spoke about recent travels and meetings with Commonwealth leaders. The dedication and sense of duty that had driven Charles throughout his life as Prince of Wales had only intensified since becoming king. Yet William could also see the toll it was taking, the late nights spent on correspondence, the weight of making decisions that affected millions of people, and the constant awareness that every word and action would be scrutinized and analyzed. Catherine, meanwhile, observed the interactions between her children and their grandfather with the keen eye of a mother who understood the importance of these relationships. Charles had always been an involved grandfather, taking genuine interest in each child's development and offering guidance that balanced royal expectations with personal encouragement. These lunch gatherings provided opportunities for conversations that were impossible during more formal occasions. The afternoon was progressing beautifully, with everyone relaxed and enjoying the rare opportunity to simply be together as a family. Yet beneath the surface, each family member carried their own thoughts and concerns about the future, the challenges they faced, and the decisions that lay ahead. The weight of their public roles never completely disappeared, even in moments of private joy. As dessert was served, a selection of traditional British sweets that had been family favorites for generations, the conversation turned to upcoming events and shared responsibilities. The Christmas season was approaching, bringing with it a full schedule of official engagements, charitable events, and family traditions that would once again thrust them into the public eye. But, for now, in this moment, surrounded by family and the familiar comfort of Windsor Castle, there was peace. The autumn light continued to filter through the windows, the conversation flowed naturally, and the simple pleasure of being together overshadowed all other concerns. This was what they were fighting to preserve, not just the institution of the monarchy, but the family bonds that gave it meaning and purpose. The stage was set for what would become a deeply meaningful afternoon, though none of them yet realized just how significant this gathering would prove to be. Sometimes the most important moments in life arrive disguised as ordinary family meals, their true significance only becoming clear in retrospect. Today was destined to become one of those moments, a turning point that would strengthen family bonds and provide the foundation for facing whatever challenges lay ahead. The conversation had settled into a comfortable rhythm when Charles unexpectedly set down his teacup with a gentle clink that seemed to echo more loudly than it should have in the warm dining room. The sound drew everyone's attention, not because it was jarring, but because something in his demeanor had shifted. The easy smile that had graced his features throughout lunch remained, but there was a new depth to his expression, a vulnerability that his family had learned to recognize over the years. "I've been thinking quite a lot lately," Charles began, his voice carrying the measured tone he typically reserved for more serious conversations. "About legacy, about what we leave behind, and about the precious nature of moments like these." He gestured gently around the table, encompassing his family with a look of profound gratitude that spoke volumes about his current state of mind. William felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same sensation he experienced whenever his father's conversations took on this reflective quality. As heir to the throne, he had become attuned to these moments when Charles seemed to be weighing the enormity of their shared responsibilities. The past few years had brought numerous challenges that had tested the entire family's resilience, and William had watched his father navigate each crisis with the steady determination that had characterized his entire adult life. Catherine reached across the table, her movement so natural and instinctive that it seemed choreographed, and gently placed her hand over Charles's weathered fingers. The gesture was simple, yet it carried the weight of years of mutual respect and genuine affection. In that touch, she communicated understanding, support, and the kind of unconditional love that transcends the complexities of royal duty and public expectation. "We're all here, together," she said softly, her words deliberately chosen for their simplicity and truth. "That's what matters most." Her voice carried the warmth that had made her beloved not just by the public, but by every member of the royal family who had come to know her genuine nature. Over the years, Catherine had proven herself to be far more than just William's wife or a future queen consort. She had become the family's emotional anchor, the person who could find the right words in difficult moments and offer comfort without making anyone feel diminished. George, who had been quietly observing the exchange with the perceptive intelligence that had always surprised adults, leaned forward slightly in his chair. At 21, he possessed a maturity that came from understanding his unique position in life, combined with the natural wisdom that seemed to run in the family. "Grandfather, you've taught us that legacy isn't just about what we accomplish in public," he said thoughtfully. "It's about how we treat each other and the values we pass down. Today feels like one of those moments you'll want us to remember." The young man's words carried a weight that surprised everyone at the table, including himself. George had always been introspective, but his ability to articulate complex emotions had developed remarkably over his university years. His studies in history had given him perspective on the royal family's long journey through centuries of change, and he understood better than most how rare and precious these private family moments truly were. Charlotte nodded in agreement with her brother, her artistic sensibilities making her particularly attuned to the emotional undercurrents of family dynamics. "Every family photograph, every story we tell about days like today, becomes part of something larger than ourselves," she added, her voice reflecting the passion she brought to everything she cared about. Her art history studies had taught her about the power of moments captured in time, and she recognized that they were living through something that would be treasured in memory long after the afternoon had ended. Louis, not wanting to be left out of the meaningful conversation, chimed in with the directness that was characteristic of his age and personality. "I like it when we can just be normal together," he said, his honesty bringing smiles to every face around the table. "Even though we're never really normal, I suppose, but you know what I mean. When we don't have to worry about what anyone else thinks or what we're supposed to say." The teenagers' observations struck at the heart of their shared experience as members of the royal family. The constant awareness of public scrutiny, the need to measure every word and action against its potential impact, and the weight of representing something larger than themselves, these were burdens they all carried, even during private moments. Louis's wish for normalcy resonated with everyone present, reminding them of what made gatherings like this so precious. Camilla, who had been listening to the exchange with the careful attention she brought to family conversations, spoke up with the practical wisdom that had served her well in her role as queen consort. "Normal is what we make it," she said gently. "This room, this table, these conversations, this is our normal. It may be different from other families' normal, but it's ours, and it's real." Her words carried the authority of someone who had learned to navigate the unique challenges of royal life while maintaining her authentic self. Camilla's journey to acceptance by both the family and the public had taught her valuable lessons about the importance of finding genuine moments within the constraints of their extraordinary circumstances. Charles listened to each family member's contribution with the focused attention that had always characterized his approach to family conversations. As a father and grandfather, he had learned that these moments of open communication were among the most important investments he could make in their shared future. The formal education his children and grandchildren received was important, but these kitchen table philosophy sessions taught lessons that no textbook could provide. "I need to share something with all of you," Charles said, his voice taking on the quality that indicated he was about to address something that had been weighing on his mind. The family members straightened slightly in their chairs, not with alarm, but with the focused attention they had learned to give when he spoke in this particular tone. "The doctors have been monitoring some concerning developments with my health." The words hung in the air for a moment, not because they were unexpected. The family had been aware that Charles had been undergoing regular medical consultations, but because hearing them spoken aloud gave them a weight and reality that previous discussions had somehow avoided. William felt his breath catch, while Catherine's grip on her father-in-law's hand tightened almost imperceptibly. Nothing immediately life-threatening, Charles continued quickly, recognizing the concern that had flashed across their faces. But, at my age, and, given the stresses of this role, they want me to be more mindful of my limitations and, more intentional about how I spend my time and energy. His voice remained steady, reflecting the same composure he had shown throughout his public life when addressing difficult topics. The revelation wasn't entirely surprising. Charles was 75 years old and had been dealing with the tremendous pressures of being monarch during a particularly challenging period in British history. The transition from his mother's long reign had required enormous emotional and physical energy, and the ongoing demands of modernizing the monarchy while maintaining its essential character had taken their toll. What does that mean, practically? William asked, his question reflecting both his concern as a son and his awareness as heir to the throne. The practical implications of his father's health concerns extended far beyond personal worry. They affected the entire institution and the millions of people who looked to the monarchy for stability and continuity. Charles smiled at his son's directness, appreciating William's ability to address both the emotional and practical aspects of difficult situations. It means I need to be more selective about my engagements, more willing to delegate responsibilities, and more conscious of the need to prepare you for an expanded role, he replied honestly. It also means that moments like this, time spent with family, need to become a higher priority rather than something we squeeze in between official duties. The honesty in his response was characteristic of Charles's approach to family communication. He had learned from his own upbringing that children and grandchildren deserved straightforward information about family circumstances, delivered with appropriate consideration for their ages and emotional readiness. Shielding them from reality ultimately served no one's interests, while honest communication built the trust and understanding that would help them navigate future challenges together. Charlotte reached for her grandfather's other hand, creating a connection that seemed to anchor him to the present moment and to the family that surrounded him. "We want more time together too," she said simply. "Not just because of health concerns, but because these are the moments that matter most. Everything else we do is important, but this being together as a family, this is what gives everything else meaning." Her words reflected a wisdom that went beyond her 19 years, demonstrating the remarkable maturity that all three children had developed as a result of their unique upbringing. Growing up in the royal family had taught them to appreciate the preciousness of private moments and to understand that public service, while important, was ultimately about serving something larger than themselves, including their own family bonds. George nodded in agreement with his sister, his expression reflecting the gravity with which he approached family responsibilities. "We've always known that our lives would be different from most people's," he said thoughtfully. "But that doesn't mean we have to sacrifice the things that make us who we are as a family. If anything, it makes those things more important." The young man's observation struck at the heart of one of the royal family's ongoing challenges, balancing public duty with private relationships, official responsibilities with personal needs, and institutional requirements with human connections. Previous generations had sometimes struggled to find this balance, but the current family seemed determined to prioritize both aspects of their lives rather than sacrificing one for the other. Louis, with the straightforward thinking that characterized teenagers, cut to the essence of the situation with characteristic directness. "So we'll spend more time together, and grandfather will take better care of himself, and we'll all help each other with whatever needs to be done," he said matter-of-factly. "It's not really that complicated, is it?" The simplicity of his assessment brought gentle laughter from around the table, not because it was naive, but because it captured an essential truth that adults sometimes overcomplicated with worry and planning. At its core, the situation was indeed straightforward. A family that loved each other was choosing to prioritize time together while adapting to changing circumstances. William found himself studying his father's face, noting the relief that seemed to follow the family's positive response to his news. The conversation had clearly been weighing on Charles's mind, and the loving acceptance with which it had been received was exactly what he had hoped for but, perhaps hadn't dared to expect. "There's something else," Charles continued, his voice taking on a warmer tone that indicated he was moving toward more positive territory. "I've been thinking about ways we can make these family connections stronger and more regular. I know our schedules are all complicated, but I'd like to establish some traditions that ensure we have time together, regardless of what else is happening in our public lives." The suggestion was met with immediate enthusiasm from everyone at the table. The idea of creating intentional family time, protected from the demands of royal duty and public engagement, appealed to all of them. They had learned over the years that their relationships with each other were their greatest source of strength and support, but those relationships required the same kind of careful tending that they gave to their official responsibilities. Catherine's mind was already working through the practical aspects of making such a commitment work within their complex schedules. "We could start with monthly family lunches like this one," she suggested. "No official business, no staff, just us talking about whatever's on our minds. And maybe occasional family weekends, when we can manage them." The proposal was met with nods of agreement from around the table. The idea of regular, protected family time represented more than just personal preference. It was a commitment to preserving the human connections that gave their public service meaning and purpose. Without strong family bonds, the weight of royal responsibility could become overwhelming and isolating. As the afternoon light continued to shift and change outside the dining room windows, the conversation evolved into planning and dreaming about the family traditions they wanted to establish and maintain. The health concerns that had prompted Charles's candor became the catalyst for something positive and life-affirming, a renewed commitment to the relationships that mattered most to all of them. The second course of their afternoon together was drawing to a close, but the emotional foundation being laid would support them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The afternoon light had shifted to create a golden warmth that seemed to embrace the dining room as the family continued their conversation. What had begun as a pleasant lunch was transforming into something far more significant, a moment of genuine connection that would be remembered and cherished for years to come. Charles looked around the table at the faces of his family, each one reflecting the love and concern that had characterized their response to his earlier revelations about his health. William had been thinking deeply about his father's words regarding the need for more intentional family time and expanded responsibilities. As heir to the throne, he had always known that eventually he would need to assume greater duties, but the timeline had always seemed abstract and distant. Now, faced with the reality of his father's health concerns and the natural progression of time, those future responsibilities felt more immediate and concrete. "I've been considering something myself," William said, his voice carrying the thoughtful tone that indicated he was about to share something significant. "Catherine and I have talked extensively about how we can better support you, Father, while also ensuring that our children continue to have the kind of upbringing that prepares them for their future roles without overwhelming them." Catherine nodded, understanding that this was the moment they had agreed to share their own plans with the family. Over the past several months, they had been discussing ways to gradually increase their official responsibilities while maintaining the family balance that had always been their priority. The conversation with Charles about his health had accelerated these discussions, but it had not created them. "We want to take on more of the international travel and Commonwealth responsibilities," Catherine continued, her voice reflecting the confidence that came from careful consideration and planning. "Not because we're trying to push anyone aside, but because we believe it's time for us to shoulder more of the burden and because we want our children to see service as something that brings families together rather than drives them apart." The proposal was music to Charles's ears, though he was careful not to let his relief show too obviously. For years, he had worried about the toll that royal duties might take on his son's family, remembering his own struggles to balance duty with parenthood during William's childhood. The fact that William and Catherine were volunteering to take on additional responsibilities, rather than having them imposed upon them, suggested a level of readiness and commitment that filled him with pride. George looked up from his dessert with the serious expression that had become characteristic of his approach to family discussions. "Does this mean we'll be traveling more as a family?" he asked, his question reflecting both curiosity and a practical understanding of how royal duties affected family logistics. As the eldest grandchild, he had already begun to understand the way his future role would shape his life choices and experiences. "Some travel, yes," William replied, "but we're committed to ensuring that your education and personal development remain the top priorities. The goal is to gradually expose all of you to different aspects of royal duty so that when the time comes for you to make your own choices about service, you'll do so from a position of knowledge rather than obligation." This approach reflected the lessons that William and Catherine had learned from observing previous generations of the royal family. They had seen how sudden immersion in royal duties could be overwhelming and how a lack of preparation could lead to difficulties in adapting to public life. Their strategy was to introduce their children to royal responsibilities gradually, always within the context of family service rather than individual obligation. Charlotte set down her spoon and leaned forward slightly, her artistic sensibilities making her particularly interested in the visual and cultural aspects of royal travel. "I'd love to learn more about the Commonwealth countries and their artistic traditions," she said enthusiastically. "If we're going to represent the monarchy internationally, I want to understand and appreciate the cultures we're visiting, not just fulfill official obligations." Her comment reflected the kind of thoughtful engagement that had always impressed her grandparents and parents. Charlotte had inherited her grandfather's appreciation for cultural diversity and her grandmother's keen interest in the arts. Her desire to approach royal duties with genuine curiosity and respect rather than mere obligation suggested that she was developing the kind of mindset that would serve her well in future roles. Louis, who had been listening with the focused attention he brought to important family conversations, raised a practical concern that demonstrated his growing maturity. "Will this mean we see each other less because everyone's traveling more, or will it mean we travel together more often?" he asked. "Because I don't want all this duty stuff to mean less family time." The 16-year-old's question went to the heart of the family's ongoing challenge: how to fulfill their public responsibilities without sacrificing the private relationships that gave those responsibilities meaning. It was a concern that every member of the royal family had grappled with at different stages of their lives, and it required constant attention and adjustment. "That's exactly why we're having this conversation," Charles said, his voice carrying the warmth that characterized his interactions with his grandchildren. "The whole point of planning more intentionally is to ensure that service brings us together rather than pulling us apart. Some trips will be taken individually because that's most effective, but others can be family endeavors that serve multiple purposes." Camilla had been quietly observing the family dynamics throughout the conversation, noting the ease with which they communicated about complex topics and the genuine consideration each member showed for the other's perspectives. As someone who had joined the family later in life, she had developed an appreciation for the strong foundations that made such open communication possible. "What strikes me most about this conversation," Camilla said thoughtfully, "is how naturally you're all approaching these changes as opportunities rather than burdens. That speaks to something very healthy about how this family has learned to view service and duty." Her observation was astute and important. Previous generations of the royal family had sometimes struggled with the weight of duty, viewing it as something that was imposed upon them rather than chosen. The current family's approach, treating royal responsibility as a collaborative effort that could strengthen family bonds rather than strain them, represented a significant evolution in how they understood their roles. The conversation was interrupted by the gentle sound of tea being served, a mid-afternoon tradition that provided a natural pause in their discussion. The service was informal, with family members helping themselves and each other rather than waiting for formal presentation. This small detail reflected the atmosphere of the entire gathering, respectful of tradition but adapted to the family's actual needs and preferences. As they settled back with their tea, the conversation naturally evolved toward more specific planning. Charles began sharing some of the international commitments that were coming up in the next year, explaining which ones might be appropriate for family participation and which ones required specialized preparation or experience. The Commonwealth Games in 2 years will be a particularly important opportunity, Charles explained. It's the kind of event where the entire family can participate meaningfully, each contributing their own strengths and interests while supporting the overall mission of strengthening Commonwealth bonds. William nodded enthusiastically, remembering his own positive experiences at previous Commonwealth events. The Games always showcase the best aspects of international cooperation and friendly competition, he said. It would be an excellent opportunity for the children to see how royal participation can support positive values and bring people together. Catherine was already thinking about the practical aspects of such participation, her organized mind working through the logistics that would be required to make family involvement successful. We'd need to coordinate with the children's school schedules and ensure that any participation feels meaningful rather than superficial, she mused. But the educational value alone would make it worthwhile. George's eyes lit up with interest as he considered the possibilities. As someone who had always been interested in sports and international affairs, the Commonwealth Games represented exactly the kind of royal engagement that appealed to his personal interests while fulfilling official responsibilities. Could we visit some of the training facilities beforehand? He asked. I'd love to meet the athletes and understand their preparation process. The question demonstrated the kind of genuine engagement that made royal visits meaningful for everyone involved. Rather than simply showing up for ceremonial purposes, George was already thinking about how to make the experience educational and personally enriching while still fulfilling official duties. Charlotte was considering different aspects of potential Commonwealth Games involvement, her artistic background leading her toward the cultural celebrations that typically surrounded such events. The opening and closing ceremonies are always incredible displays of the host country's cultural heritage, she observed. I'd love to learn about the artistic traditions and maybe even find ways to support local artists and performers. Her comment reflected the kind of thoughtful engagement that had characterized royal involvement in the arts for generations. Charlotte's genuine interest in cultural expression, combined with her royal platform, created opportunities for supporting and promoting artistic traditions that might otherwise struggle for international recognition. Louis, meanwhile, was thinking about the technological aspects of modern sporting events and how they might relate to his own interests. The Commonwealth Games probably involve a lot of interesting technology for timing, broadcasting, and athlete performance monitoring, he said. That could be really fascinating to learn about. The teenager's observation highlighted one of the advantages of the family's varied interests and ages. Each family member brought different perspectives and enthusiasms to royal engagements, creating opportunities for more comprehensive and meaningful involvement than any single person could achieve. As the tea service continued and the conversation evolved, Charles found himself feeling increasingly optimistic about the future. The health concerns that had prompted today's honest conversation were real and required attention, but they had also created an opportunity for the family to reimagine how they approached their shared responsibilities. The afternoon was progressing beautifully, with each family member contributing their own insights and perspectives to a conversation that was shaping their collective future. The informal setting and relaxed atmosphere had allowed for the kind of honest communication that was sometimes difficult to achieve during more structured occasions. Outside the dining room windows, the autumn light continued to shift and change, marking the passage of time while highlighting the timeless nature of the family bonds being strengthened around the table. This was more than just a pleasant family lunch. It was a moment of transformation that would influence how they approached their roles and relationships for years to come. The third phase of their afternoon together was revealing the depth of their commitment to each other and to the institution they served. Each challenge they discussed became an opportunity for growth and connection. Each concern was met with practical solutions and mutual support. The foundation they were building would prove strong enough to support whatever changes lay ahead. The late afternoon sun was casting longer shadows across the dining room when Catherine stood quietly and moved to the antique sideboard that held several family photographs. She selected a particular frame, a recent portrait of the entire family taken during the previous Christmas celebration at Sandringham. The image captured a moment of genuine happiness, with everyone laughing at something Lewis had said just as the photographer snapped the picture. "I look at this photograph every time I'm here," Catherine said, returning to the table with the frame in her hands. "And I'm always struck by how natural we look together, despite everything that makes our lives unusual. That's what I want to preserve as we move forward, this sense of genuine connection that has nothing to do with titles or duties and everything to do with love." She placed the photograph in the center of the table where everyone could see it, creating a focal point for the conversation that was about to take an even more emotional turn. The image served as a tangible reminder of what they were all working to protect and strengthen, not just the institution of the monarchy, but the family relationships that gave that institution its heart and meaning. William looked at the photograph and, then, at his wife, recognizing the deliberate nature of her gesture. Over their years of marriage, he had learned to read the subtle signals that indicated when Catherine was preparing to address something particularly important. Her decision to introduce the visual reminder of their family bond suggested that she was ready to share something that had been on her mind for quite some time. "There's something I've been wanting to say to all of you," Catherine continued, her voice carrying the warmth and sincerity that had endeared her to family members and the public alike. "When I married William, I knew I was joining something much larger than just a family. I was becoming part of an institution that has served this country for over 1,000 years. That was both thrilling and terrifying." Charles leaned forward slightly, interested to hear Catherine's perspective on her journey into royal life. Over the years, he had watched her navigate the complexities of her role with grace and intelligence, but they had rarely discussed her personal feelings about the transformation her life had undergone. He suspected that her insights would be valuable for the entire family to hear. "The terrifying part wasn't the public attention or the protocol or even the responsibilities," Catherine continued. "It was the possibility that I might not be good enough, that I might somehow diminish what you had all built together, or that I might not be able to contribute meaningfully to something so important and established." Her honesty was characteristic of the open communication style that had become a hallmark of family gatherings, but it still surprised some family members to hear her express vulnerabilities that she had clearly kept private for years. The admission revealed the depth of her commitment to the family and her understanding of the weight of her role. George looked up from the photograph with the serious expression that characterized his approach to family discussions. "But you've never been anything other than perfect at being part of our family," he said simply. "I can't imagine the family without you, and I don't think any of us can remember what it was like before you were here." The young man's statement carried the unconscious wisdom of someone who had grown up with Catherine as a constant presence in his life. From his perspective, she wasn't someone who had joined the family, she was an integral part of it who had always been there. His comment reflected the complete acceptance and love that all three children felt for their mother. Charlotte nodded in agreement with her brother, adding her own perspective with the emotional intelligence that had always impressed the adults in the family. "You've taught us that being part of this family doesn't mean losing who you are as an individual," she said thoughtfully. "You've shown us that we can be authentic and still fulfill our responsibilities, that we can care about our own interests and passions while still serving something larger than ourselves." The teenager's observation highlighted one of Catherine's most important contributions to the family dynamic. Rather than conforming to a predetermined role or suppressing her own personality and interests, she had found ways to integrate her authentic self with her royal responsibilities, creating a model for how future generations could approach their own roles. Lewis, with the directness that had become his trademark, cut straight to the heart of the matter. "You worry too much about whether you're good enough," he told his mother with the kind of honesty that only children can deliver without causing offense. "You're the best at being you, and that's all any of us need to be, the best at being ourselves." The 16-year-old's assessment brought gentle laughter from around the table, not because it was naive, but because it captured an essential truth that adults sometimes forgot in their concern about measuring up to external expectations. The simplicity of his perspective served as a reminder that authenticity and love were often more important than perfection. "That's exactly the point I wanted to make," Catherine said, her voice warming with emotion as she continued. "I've learned over these years that our strength as a family doesn't come from being perfect or from meeting some external standard of what a royal family should be. Our strength comes from being genuine with each other and supporting each other's authentic selves while we serve together." Camilla had been listening with the focused attention she brought to all family conversations, and she recognized the importance of Catherine's message not just for the current moment, but for the family's future. "That's wisdom that took me many years to learn," she said quietly. "The instinct is always to try to become what you think others expect you to be, rather than bringing your authentic self to the role and trusting that authenticity is what people actually need and want." The Queen Consort's comment carried the weight of her own journey into royal life, which had been more challenging and public than Catherine's. Her hard-won understanding of the importance of authenticity in royal service provided valuable perspective for the entire family. William had been watching his wife throughout this exchange with the admiration that had characterized his feelings for her since their university days. "What Catherine is saying applies to all of us," he said, his voice reflecting both love for his family and deep understanding of their shared challenges. "Father, you've always encouraged us to be ourselves within our roles rather than trying to fit some predetermined mold. But it's worth saying explicitly that this is what makes our family work." The Prince of Wales's observation highlighted a crucial aspect of the family's approach to royal service. Unlike some historical periods when rigid conformity was expected from royal family members, the current generation had embraced individual personalities and interests as strengths rather than complications to be managed. Charles smiled at his son's words, recognizing the truth in the observation and feeling pride in how his approach to parenting had influenced the family culture. "Your mother always said that the monarchy's greatest strength was its ability to adapt and evolve while maintaining its essential character," he said, referring to Queen Elizabeth II. "I think what Catherine is describing, being authentic while serving, is exactly what she meant." The mention of the late Queen brought a moment of reverent silence, as it always did when family members reflected on her legacy and influence. Elizabeth II had indeed mastered the balance between personal authenticity and royal duty, creating a model that continued to guide her family even after her passing. "I have a confession to make," Charles continued, his voice taking on the vulnerable quality that had characterized several moments in the afternoon's conversation. "There are times when I worry that I'm not living up to her example, that I'm not the king she would have wanted me to be or that the country needs me to be." The admission surprised no one at the table, but hearing it spoken aloud gave weight to feelings that family members had sensed but never directly discussed. The challenge of following such a long and successful reign was something that Charles carried daily, and the fact that he was willing to acknowledge it openly created space for deeper family understanding and support. Catherine reached across the table again, this time placing both hands over Charles's in a gesture of support and affection. "You're not trying to be her," she said gently but firmly. "You're trying to be the best version of yourself in service to the same ideals she served. That's completely different, and it's exactly what you should be doing." Her words carried the conviction of someone who had observed Charles's approach to kingship closely and had seen the dedication and thoughtfulness he brought to every decision. From her perspective, his authenticity was his greatest strength, not a weakness to be overcome. "The country doesn't need you to be Queen Elizabeth II, William added, his voice carrying both respect for his grandmother's memory and confidence in his father's abilities. "The country needs you to be King Charles III, with all the wisdom, experience, and genuine care for people that you bring to the role. That's what continuity means, not copying the past, but building on it with integrity." The Prince of Wales's analysis reflected his deep understanding of both the monarchy as an institution and his father as an individual. His confidence in Charles's approach provided reassurance that was clearly needed and deeply appreciated. George looked up from the family photograph with an expression of sudden understanding. Is this what growing up in this family prepares us for? He asked thoughtfully. Learning to be ourselves while serving something bigger than ourselves? Because that seems like it would be useful for anyone, not just people who happen to be born into royal families. The young man's question revealed the sophisticated thinking that had impressed his professors and mentors throughout his education. His ability to extrapolate from their family's specific circumstances to broader principles of service and authenticity demonstrated the kind of intellectual maturity that would serve him well in future roles. That's exactly right, Charles replied, his pride in his grandson evident in both his voice and expression. The specific circumstances of our family are unusual, but the principles we're discussing, authenticity, service, supporting each other, finding meaning in contributing to something larger than ourselves, those are universal values that anyone can benefit from embracing. Charlotte had been studying the family photograph while listening to the conversation, and she suddenly pointed to a detail that had caught her attention. "Look at our expressions in this picture," she said. "We're all looking at Louis because he had just said something funny, but we're also all clearly enjoying each other's company. You can see the genuine affection and connection between us. That's what people respond to when they see us in public, the sense that we actually like each other." The teenager's artistic eye had identified something important about their family dynamic that extended beyond their private relationships to their public effectiveness. People could sense authenticity in relationships, and the genuine connections between royal family members were part of what made their service meaningful to the public. "That's the most important thing we can model for the country and the Commonwealth," Camilla observed. "Not perfection, but genuine care for each other and commitment to working together despite our individual differences and challenges." Her comment brought the conversation full circle to the themes that had emerged throughout the afternoon: the importance of authenticity, the strength that came from genuine relationships, and the way that personal connections enhanced rather than competed with public service. As the afternoon light continued to fade outside the dining room windows, the family found themselves in a moment of profound connection and understanding. The conversations they had shared were creating a foundation that would support them through whatever changes and challenges lay ahead. They were more than just a royal family fulfilling ceremonial duties. They were a group of people who genuinely loved and supported each other while working together to serve something larger than themselves. The emotional gesture that was about to emerge from this afternoon of honest communication was building naturally from the love and understanding they had been sharing. The stage was set for a moment that would crystallize everything they had been discussing and create a memory that would sustain them through future challenges. The golden light of late afternoon had transformed the dining room into something almost magical, casting warm glows across the faces of the royal family as their conversation reached its most meaningful point. The family photograph that Catherine had placed at the center of the table seemed to capture not just a moment in time, but the essence of what they had been discussing throughout this remarkable afternoon, the genuine love and connection that made their public service meaningful and sustainable. It was in this moment of perfect understanding and emotional connection that William and Catherine exchanged a look that spoke volumes about their partnership and shared commitment. Without needing to discuss it, they both recognized that this was the moment they had been waiting for, the opportunity to make the gesture they had been planning for months but had never found the right time to execute. William reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small, elegantly wrapped package that he placed gently on the table in front of his father. The gesture was simple but loaded with significance, creating a moment of surprised curiosity around the table. Charles looked at the package with genuine bewilderment, clearly not expecting any gifts during what he had understood to be a casual family lunch. "This isn't for any particular occasion," Catherine said softly, her voice carrying the warmth and love that had characterized her interactions with Charles throughout their relationship. "It's simply because we wanted you to know how much your example means to us and how grateful we are for everything you've taught us about service, dedication, and putting family first even when the demands of duty could easily pull us apart." The words were carefully chosen but delivered with spontaneous emotion, reflecting the genuine feelings that had been building throughout the afternoon's conversations. The gift represented more than just a thoughtful gesture, it was a tangible expression of the love, respect, and gratitude that defined their family relationships. Charles looked around the table at the expectant faces of his family members, clearly moved by the unexpected nature of the gesture but also curious about what the small package might contain. His hands, weathered by age and the countless handshakes, document signings, and ceremonial gestures of a lifetime of service, trembled slightly as he carefully unwrapped the elegant paper. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal with his initials embossed in gold on the cover. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly custom-made, and the leather had the rich patina that suggested both quality and permanence. But, as Charles opened the journal, he discovered that it wasn't empty. The first several pages contained handwritten entries in different handwriting styles that he immediately recognized. "We've all written letters to you," George explained, his young voice carrying surprising emotion as he watched his grandfather's reaction. "Letters about what you mean to us personally, not as the king, but as a father and grandfather and the person who taught us how to balance being human with serving something larger than ourselves." The first letter, in William's distinctive handwriting, began with words that Charles read silently but whose emotional impact was visible on his face. The letters that followed, from Catherine, George, Charlotte, and Louis, each reflected their individual voices and perspectives, but all conveyed the same essential message: their deep love and appreciation for the man who had shaped their understanding of duty, service, and family commitment. Camilla had contributed her own letter, written in the elegant script that reflected her excellent education and thoughtful nature. Her perspective as someone who had joined the family later in life provided unique insights into Charles's character and the positive influence he had on everyone around him. "The journal is for you to use however you'd like," Catherine continued, her voice gentle but clear as she explained their intentions. "But we hoped you might use it to record your thoughts about the things that matter most to you, family moments like this one, reflections on your experiences as king, wisdom you want to pass down to future generations." The suggestion reflected their understanding of Charles as someone who had always been thoughtful and reflective, someone who found meaning in recording and preserving important thoughts and experiences. The journal was designed to be both a repository for their family's expressions of love and a tool for his own reflection and legacy building. Charles set the journal down gently on the table, but his hands remained on the cover as if he needed to maintain physical connection with this unexpected gift. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears, and his expression reflected the kind of deep emotional impact that comes from being truly seen and appreciated by the people who matter most. "I don't know what to say," he said quietly, his voice carrying the vulnerability that had characterized several moments in the afternoon's conversation. This is one of the most meaningful gifts I've ever received. Not because of what it is, but because of what it represents about our family and the love we share." The response was exactly what his family had hoped for but hadn't dared to expect. Charles had always been appreciative of thoughtful gestures, but his reaction to the journal suggested that it had touched something particularly deep and meaningful for him. "There's one more thing," Louis said with the directness that had become his trademark throughout the afternoon. "We want you to promise that you'll use it. Not just keep it as a nice gift, but actually write in it. Because someday, when we're all older, we want to be able to read your thoughts about times like this." The 16-year-old's request demonstrated the remarkable maturity that all three children had developed through their unique upbringing. They understood that the journal's true value would come not from being a beautiful object, but from being a record of their grandfather's thoughts, experiences, and wisdom during this crucial period in their family's history. Charles smiled through his emotion at his youngest grandson's practical approach to the gift. "I promise," he said solemnly, treating Louis's request with the gravity it deserved. "In fact, I think I know exactly what my first entry will be about, this afternoon, this conversation, and how grateful I am for all of you." The promise carried weight because everyone at the table knew that Charles was a man who took his commitments seriously, whether they involved affairs of state or personal family matters. His word meant that the journal would indeed become a record of his thoughts and experiences during this important time. "What made you think of this?" Charles asked, looking primarily at William and Catherine but including the children in his question. "It's such a thoughtful and personal approach to expressing appreciation." Catherine glanced at William before answering, their silent communication reflecting the deep partnership that had characterized their marriage and their approach to royal duties. "We've been talking for months about how to express what you mean to us," she said honestly. "Traditional gifts didn't seem adequate for what we wanted to convey, and we wanted to give you something that would be useful and meaningful rather than just decorative." William nodded in agreement with his wife's explanation. "We also wanted to give you something that would encourage you to record your own thoughts and experiences," he added. "You have so much wisdom and so many insights that should be preserved, not just for our family but potentially for future generations who might benefit from understanding your perspective on this unique role and this remarkable time in history." The Prince of Wales's comment reflected his understanding of his father not just as a parent and grandfather, but as a historical figure whose thoughts and experiences during this transition period in the monarchy would be valuable for future study and understanding. Charlotte leaned forward slightly, her artistic sensibilities making her particularly attuned to the visual and tactile aspects of the gift. "We worked with a craftsman who specializes in making books that last for centuries," she explained. "The leather, the paper, the binding, everything is designed to endure so that your words will be preserved for as long as possible." Her attention to the physical durability of the journal reflected the family's understanding that they were creating something intended to last far beyond the immediate moment. This wasn't just a gift for today, it was an investment in family memory and historical preservation. George had been watching his grandfather's continued emotional response to the gift with the perceptive intelligence that characterized his approach to family dynamics. "We hope it becomes a family tradition," he said thoughtfully. "Maybe someday, when it's my turn to serve, I'll have a similar journal where I can record my own experiences and thoughts, with the wisdom you're going to write as a foundation to build upon." The young man's comment revealed his sophisticated understanding of how family traditions and wisdom could be passed down through generations. He saw the journal not just as a gift to his grandfather, but as the beginning of a legacy that could benefit the family for decades to come. Charles carefully opened the journal again, this time reading more of the handwritten letters that his family had contributed. Each letter was clearly written with great thought and care, reflecting not just love but deep understanding of his character, his challenges, and his contributions to their lives and to the country he served. "Reading these letters, I'm struck by how well you all understand not just what I do, but why I do it," he said, his voice reflecting wonder at being so thoroughly known and appreciated by his family. "That means more to me than I can adequately express." The observation highlighted one of the most remarkable aspects of their family dynamic, the depth of understanding and empathy they had developed for each other's roles, challenges, and motivations. This understanding had been built through years of honest communication, shared experiences, and genuine interest in each other's perspectives. Camilla reached over and placed her hand on Charles's arm, her gesture providing support and sharing in the emotional significance of the moment. "What strikes me most about this afternoon is how naturally this gesture arose from everything we've been discussing," she said perceptively. "The gift itself is beautiful and meaningful, but it's also the perfect expression of the family bonds and mutual appreciation we've been talking about all afternoon." Her observation was astute and important. The journal wasn't just an isolated gesture of appreciation, it was the culmination of the emotional connection and understanding that had been building throughout their conversation. It represented everything they valued about their relationships with each other and their shared commitment to service. As the afternoon drew toward its close, the family lingered around the table, none of them quite ready to break the spell of connection and understanding that had been created. The journal sat in the center of the table next to the family photograph, creating a tableau that captured both their past together and their hopes for the future. I have something I want to say to all of you, Charles said, his voice carrying the formal tone he sometimes used when he wanted to ensure that his words were clearly understood and remembered. This afternoon has reminded me why we do what we do, why the personal costs of public service are worth it, and why I have never doubted that the monarchy will continue to serve this country well long into the future. He paused, looking around the table at each family member individually, his gaze conveying both love and confidence. It's because of afternoons like this one, conversations like the ones we've shared, and relationships like the ones we've built together. You've given me a gift today that goes far beyond the beautiful journal. You've given me renewed faith in our shared mission and deep gratitude for the privilege of being your father and grandfather. The words carried the weight of a lifetime of experience and the authority of someone who had dedicated his entire adult life to public service. But they also carried the warmth and love of a man speaking to the people who mattered most to him in the world. As the golden afternoon light finally began to fade and the family began to make preparations for their eventual departure, they all understood that they had participated in something remarkable. This hadn't been just a pleasant family lunch, it had been a moment of profound connection that would strengthen their bonds and sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The journal that William and Catherine had given to Charles would indeed become a treasured record of his thoughts and experiences. But, even more importantly, the afternoon that had culminated in that gift had created memories and strengthened relationships that would prove to be the royal family's greatest source of strength in the years to come. Their emotional gesture had achieved exactly what they had hoped. It had expressed their love and appreciation while also encouraging the preservation of wisdom and experience for future generations. Most importantly, it had demonstrated that even within the unique constraints and responsibilities of royal life, genuine human connection and family love could flourish and provide the foundation for meaningful service to others. The royal lunch had indeed been highlighted by Catherine and William's emotional gesture to King Charles, but the true significance lay not in any single moment or gift, but in the afternoon-long demonstration of what made their family strong. Authentic relationships, open communication, mutual support, and shared commitment to serving something larger than themselves while never losing sight of what mattered most, their love for each other.